So I thought to myself, if someone would throw out a bike, what else would they throw out? So that's why I started digging in the garbage constantly. Even if it wasn't a big garbage day, I was always in the trash cans and stuff.
What happened between Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz became one of reality television's most enduring mysteries. For years, fans watched the two build American pickers into one of television's biggest success stories before their friendship unraveled in a way that was never fully explained. Rumors spread, stories conflicted, and the questions only grew louder as Frank disappeared from the show. Now, a rare public comment from Mike Wolfe is forcing fans to revisit everything they thought they knew. So what really happened between Mike and Frank? And what is Mike finally admitting after years of speculation? Join us as we uncover what Mike Wolfe is finally admitting about Frank Fritz after years of speculation. What really happened behind the scenes? For years, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz were the faces of American pickers. They moved through small towns and barns like nothing could come between them. For a partnership that seemed so solid, fans couldn't help but root for them. This is what made their fallout feel so confusing to viewers. While the episodes continued, something felt different. The balance between the two men changed. Frank became less present over time and eventually stopped appearing on screen. But the explanations for his absence were never fully clear. There was no clear moment that marked the end of the partnership on screen. Only a gradual distance that people could feel but not fully understand. That silence created questions almost immediately. Fans who had followed the show from the beginning noticed the distance and began asking what really happened behind the scenes. Some believed it was a simple personal fallout. Others thought business decisions were behind the changes. A few suspected deeper tension that was never spoken about publicly. However, the lack of clarity only made the curiosity stronger. What made the situation more unsettling was how little Mike and Frank addressed it directly at first. There were no detailed explanations that matched what viewers were seeing. Instead, there were brief comments, indirect responses, and long stretches where neither side offered a full picture. That silence turned into its own story, and people filled in the gaps with speculation. Over time, Frank's absence became permanent, and the questions stopped being just curiosities. They turned into a larger mystery surrounding one of reality television's most recognizable partnerships. Their story became about two men whose partnership seemed to fracture without a clear explanation. As time passed, one question continued to hang over everything. Was this simply the natural end of a long friendship, or was there something deeper that neither of them ever fully said out loud? However, before the end of their partnership, Mike and Frank were two men who came from similar backgrounds and became inseparable. The friendship that built a television empire. Before cameras and national fame, Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz were just two men from Iowa drawn to the same unusual habit of searching through other people's forgotten things. Mike started early. As a teenager, he rode his bicycle through neighborhoods looking for discarded items people no longer valued. Old signs, broken machines, anything that carried a sense of history. Frank came from a similar background, but his approach differed. He had an eye for small Americana pieces, like vintage toys, oil cans, and unusual collectibles. He also had a natural way with people that made strangers comfortable enough to open their doors and talk. When they met, there was no formal plan. It was simply two people who understood the same instinct. The idea that value could exist in places most people ignored, and that shared understanding became the foundation of their early trips. They would drive long rural roads across the Midwest in worn-out vehicles, stopping at barns, sheds, and small-town properties that looked forgotten from the outside. Most trips ended with little to show. Others led to entire collections hidden behind old doors, waiting to be discovered. There was no production schedule, audience, or expectation to perform for cameras during those years. What they had instead was time, freedom, and the unpredictability of what they might find next. As the years passed, Mike began shaping the idea into something larger. He opened Antique Archaeology, first in Iowa and later in Nashville. It was not just a shop. It became a reflection of everything he believed about preservation and memory. Frank was part of that process in a natural way. He was there on the road, in the conversations, and in the foundation of what later became a recognizable brand. Their partnership worked because it was balanced. Mike was driven and forward-looking, always thinking about what could come next. Frank was grounded, more direct, and focused on the present moment. That difference created a rhythm between them that never felt forced. Together, it worked. When the idea of American Pickers eventually took shape, it did not feel like a manufactured television concept. It felt like an extension of what they were already doing. In 2010, when the show premiered on the History Channel, viewers connected with it immediately. What stood out to audiences was not just what they found, but how they interacted with each other. Their conversations felt unplanned, and there was a familiarity between them that could not be scripted. Every rusted motorcycle, faded sign, and forgotten relic became part of a larger picture. At the center of it all was a partnership that felt genuine because it had been built long before anyone was watching. That is what made the later distance between them so difficult for viewers to accept. It was not just the loss of a television pairing, it was the fading of something that once felt natural and real. What made their story so surprising was that the cracks did not appear during the early struggles. They appeared after the success, and that changed them in ways far more than either Mike or Frank expected. Success changed everything. When American Pickers first began, nothing about it felt controlled. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz moved through rural America with freedom. But as the show grew into a national success, that freedom slowly changed shape. What started as simple road trips turned into a structured production built around schedules, filming requirements, and constant movement between locations chosen ahead of time. With that growth came pressure. The show was no longer just about finding antiques. It became a television operation with expectations, deadlines, and a growing audience that tuned in every week. The easy rhythm that once defined Mike and Frank's partnership started to shift under the weight of that expansion. Conversations became shorter between stops, and the unpredictability that once made their journey exciting began to feel more managed. Frank's role within that changing environment also began to shift. At first, both men still appeared side by side as equal parts of the experience. Over time, viewers started noticing that Frank was not always present in the same way he once was. Some episodes focused more heavily on Mike's perspective and direction, while Frank's presence felt reduced in comparison to earlier seasons. At the same time, Mike's responsibilities were expanding beyond the road. Antique Archaeology and Two Lanes Guest House grew into a recognizable brand, with merchandise and business operations that extended far beyond the television show. That growth placed Mike in a position where more decisions and planning naturally centered around him. Frank, meanwhile, remained closer to the original structure of the show, focused on the picking itself and the hands-on experience that defined their early years. Over time, that difference in focus created a subtle distance between them. Mike was moving toward building a larger framework around the show, while Frank's connection remained rooted in the original format that brought them together. Neither direction was necessarily wrong, but they were no longer moving at the same pace. Fans began to notice this change as well. Frank's later reflections suggested that he felt increasingly distant from certain aspects of the show's direction during this period. He described a sense of being less involved in decisions and less present in the evolving structure around him. Whether intentional or gradual, the space between his experience and Mike's continued to widen as the show expanded. What makes this period stand out is not a single conflict or breaking point, but the accumulation of small changes that built up over time. The schedule became tighter, and the original balance between two partners slowly adjusted to a new reality shaped by success. By the time viewers began asking questions, the shift had already taken place quietly. What began as something subtle turned into something impossible to ignore. The sudden break. At first, Frank Fritz's absence in March 2020 from American Pickers did not feel permanent. It looked like a short break, something temporary that would eventually be explained once filming continued. Episodes kept airing, Mike Wolfe remained on screen, and the show carried on with its usual rhythm. But as time passed, Frank did not return, and the silence around his absence only grew heavier. There was no clear announcement that explained everything in detail, or a moment that marked a formal ending to his time on the show. Instead, viewers were left with uncertainty. Scenes continued without him, but there was no consistent explanation that matched what fans were seeing. As the episodes moved forward, questions began to spread across the audience. People wanted to know why one of the show's original faces was suddenly missing. Online discussions picked up quickly, with different theories forming around the situation. Some believed it was related to health. Others pointed to internal disagreements or production decisions. With no direct clarification at the time, every new episode without Frank added to the speculation. Mike's public responses during this time were more reserved. He acknowledged that things had changed, but he avoided turning the situation into a public back and forth. His comments focused more on distance and the difficulties that had developed over time rather than direct explanations of specific events. Frank was doing a lot of things that he was not supposed to do, Mike claimed. As both sides shared their versions of events, the story began to diverge. Frank's perspective pointed toward disconnection and a sense of being left out during a difficult period in his life. Mike's perspective leaned more toward personal boundaries, changing circumstances, and the realities that come with long-term pressure in a public-facing production. Neither version fully matched the other, and neither side offered a complete timeline that tied everything together. Meanwhile, American Pickers continued without pause. However, on July 21, 2021, the History Channel announced that Frank Fritz was leaving American Pickers. This announcement marked the beginning of revelations about what really happened to Frank. The public saw the distance. What they didn't see were the personal battles quietly shaping everything behind the scenes. The struggles behind the scenes. As Frank Fritz slowly faded from American Pickers, the reasons behind his absence went far beyond what viewers could see on screen. What looked like a simple disappearance from a television series was tied to years of physical pain, health complications, and personal battles that built up quietly over time. Frank had long dealt with Crohn's disease, a condition that brought unpredictable flare-ups, fatigue, and severe discomfort. On its own, it was already difficult to manage, but the demands of filming made it even harder. American Pickers was not a studio-based production. It required constant travel across states, long hours on the road, and physical movement through barns and storage spaces. Over time, that routine began to take a visible toll. His back problems added another layer to the struggle. Years of lifting things and working in physically demanding environments eventually led to serious spinal issues that required surgery. Recovery was not simple, and the pain did not disappear after the procedure. During that period, medication became part of his daily life, and what began as treatment gradually turned into dependence. Frank later spoke openly about how difficult that phase was. He described moments where pain and recovery blurred together, making it hard to separate medical needs from coping habits. Alcohol also became part of that struggle during certain periods, adding to the instability he was already dealing with. Then came 2020, a year that disrupted everything. The COVID-19 pandemic brought filming to a halt and changed how production teams worked across the industry. For a show built entirely around travel and face-to-face interaction, the impact was immediate. Road trips stopped, filming schedules shifted, and the natural flow between cast members was replaced by distance and separation. That period intensified the gap that had already started forming. Communication became less frequent, and the informal contact that once came from constant travel was no longer part of daily life. Frank later reflected on this time as one where the sense of connection weakened even further. Without the structure of filming, there was little opportunity to rebuild what had already been strained. When production eventually resumed, the environment felt different, and the distance that had formed during the shutdown did not fully close. In the background of these changes, Frank also entered rehab to address struggles with alcohol and pain medication. This period marked a serious turning point in his personal life. It was not widely visible to viewers at the time, but it represented a major step in trying to regain stability after years of physical and emotional strain. Later reports also confirmed that he suffered a severe stroke in 2022, which left lasting effects on his mobility and speech, adding another difficult chapter to his health journey. According to Frank, one of the most painful parts of the separation was the feeling that he had been left completely on his own during some of the hardest years of his life. In interviews, Frank claimed that Mike Wolfe never visited him or spoke to him while he was dealing with serious health challenges and recovery from back surgery. He also suggested there were no regular phone calls or check-ins to see how he was coping during that period. From Frank's perspective, the silence hurt more than the professional fallout itself. After years of traveling the country together and building American Pickers side by side, he believed the friendship should have extended beyond the show. By the time fans fully understood the depth of Frank's struggles, the story was no longer about a television partnership that had fallen apart. It became a story about time, regret, and the things that matter most when the road finally comes to an end. What remains of the story? By the time Frank Fritz's health reached its most difficult stage, the distance between him and American Pickers had already stretched across several years. Over time, updates about his condition painted a picture of a life that had shifted away from public view. The version of him viewers remembered on screen felt distant from the reality of his later years, where recovery and care became the focus. Frank reportedly passed away on September 30th, 2024, at the age of 60. The reports surrounding his death linked it to complications from the stroke and other ongoing health conditions. His passing brought an end to a journey that had begun in quiet back roads and antique barns long before television ever entered the picture. After his death, attention turned again to Mike Wolfe and the relationship they once shared. In public statements, Mike reflected on Frank with a tone that was more personal. He confirmed that he had visited Frank privately before his passing, describing a moment of connection that took place away from cameras and public attention. His comments softened earlier assumptions that their relationship had ended in complete estrangement. Danielle Colby's reflections also added another layer to the story. She spoke about Frank with a sense of familiarity from the early years, remembering the energy he brought to the show before things changed over time. "Boy, we miss Frank. We miss his laughter. We miss his sense of humor," she said in an interview. Her perspective did not attempt to simplify what happened between him and Mike. Instead, it acknowledged that people shift, situations evolve, And relationships do not always follow a straight line. Audience reactions following Frank's passing reflected a similar complexity. Many returned to earlier episodes of American Pickers, watching them with a different understanding of what had unfolded behind the scenes. Scenes that once felt ordinary now carried emotional weight, shaped by knowledge of everything that came later. Others focused on how the show had continued, noting that its identity had changed in ways that could not fully replace what once existed between its original leads. American Pickers continued without Frank, but the tone of the series was no longer the same. The road trips continued, the format remained, and new episodes continued to air. What remains now is not a single version of events, but a collection of perspectives shaped by time, distance, and memory. Mike, Frank, and those who worked alongside them each hold different parts of the same history. In the end, the story did not settle into a final answer, but reflection. A partnership that once felt simple and steady became something more complicated as years passed. What people remember now is not just what was shown on screen, but everything that happened around it, in between it, and long after it stopped being the same. Beyond what was shown on camera, do you think Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz truly part ways on good terms? Was the way their relationship unfolded something unavoidable because of time and circumstances? Or could it have been handled differently behind the scenes? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.